On December 4, 1872, one of the most chilling maritime mysteries occurred in the Atlantic. The Spanish brig Mary Celeste was found adrift with no living souls on board. The ship was completely intact. Sails were raised, the crew's personal belongings were in place, breakfast was left uneaten, the captain's pipes were still warm. Even the ship's log was filled up to the last day. The crew of De Graciosa searched every inch of the ship and found only one peculiarity. There were 30 centimeters of water in the hold. But this was nothing for experienced sailors. Any normal captain could have dealt with such a problem in an hour. The ghost ship became a nightmare for sailors and a headache for investigators for the next 1.5 centuries. This is just the tip of the iceberg in the world of maritime mysteries. The depths of the ocean hold many more secrets than our humble science can explain. Where did the crew of the Mary Celeste disappear to? Who knows? But this Deering, a 4-masted schooner found off the coast of North Carolina in 1921. The ship ran aground, sails were up, crew's belongings were scattered, food was being prepared in the galley, but not a single soul was on board. 30 people simply vanished. And the Bachamo? This Canadian trading schooner was frozen in the ice off Alaska, but a month later, the icy prison was empty. The ship disappeared, and 25 years later, it was found drifting thousands of kilometers away, without a crew. For 25 years, that damned ship wandered through the Arctic waters like a ghost. Or even more incredible, in 1947, the American ship Orange Medan sent a chilling SOS. All officers, including the captain, are dead. They lie in the wheelhouse and on the bridge. The entire crew may be dead. Then silence, and only 2 chilling words: "I am dying." When rescuers reached the ship, they found the entire crew dead with expressions of terror on their faces and hands raised in a defensive gesture. No wounds, no damage. And a few hours later, the ship exploded and sank. Coincidence? I don't think so. And Joyita, this ship was found in 1955 in the Pacific Ocean, 5 weeks after it disappeared. 25 people were missing. The radio was working, the lifeboats were in place, but there was a ton of water in the hold. Why leave a ship that wasn't even sinking? And where, for God's sake, did all these people go without lifeboats? Sailors often speak of certain zones in the ocean where ships simply disappear. The Bermuda Triangle is the most famous, but there are others. Some attribute these disappearances to magnetic anomalies, others to underwater methane releases that can change the density of water and sink a ship in seconds. But these are all theories from scientists in warm offices. Sailors know there are places in the ocean where it's better not to venture. Places where the laws of physics work differently, where time flows differently, where you can encounter ships that have disappeared centuries ago. Every sailor knows a couple of stories about ships that saw the ghostly Flying Dutchman before disaster struck them, or about strange St. Elmo's fires that appear on the masts before a storm. Maritime superstitions? Perhaps. But when you're in the middle of the ocean, thousands of kilometers from land, and see something that shouldn't be there, you start to believe. Many of these ghost ships still don't have a rational explanation. Science can offer theories about pirate attacks, mass poisonings, giant killer waves, but these theories often don't hold up. How do you explain that on the Mary Celeste, there were valuable items and money left behind? What storm could have taken the entire crew of the Carroll Deering without damaging the ship? What force made the entire crew of the Orange Medan die with expressions of terror on their faces? When the topic of maritime mysteries arises, the Mary Celeste immediately comes to mind. This ship was discovered in 1872, and its discovery left many in shock. Imagine this: a ship sailing under full sail, as if continuing its journey, but completely empty. There was not a single person, sound, or movement on board. The ship appeared entirely intact, but its eerie atmosphere was unnerving. It seemed like a ghost ship, drifting at sea, leaving behind only questions. The crew vanished, leaving behind their belongings, personal items, and even food prepared in the galley. This created a chilling picture. The Mary Celeste was sailing the Atlantic, but the silence on board was unsettling. The captain and crew disappeared as if they had been swept off the deck. This ship became a symbol of maritime mysteries, and its story continues to spark debate. How could this have happened? Why did no one remain? Scientific explanations attempting to explain this event sound far-fetched. Some suggest the crew could have been poisoned. Others propose they left the ship due to a storm. But none of these explanations provide a clear answer. The Mary Celeste continues to captivate those interested in mysteries and the supernatural. A ship found in such a state could not fail to leave its mark on history. Today, the Mary Celeste serves as a reminder of how treacherous and unpredictable the sea can be. Yet, it still sparks debate. Is there something deeper behind this mysterious disappearance than just human error or misfortune? Is there some force that takes people, leaving ships as lifeless shells? Since its discovery, the Mary Celeste has been the subject of numerous investigations and theories, but none have provided a definitive answer. Its history is surrounded by myths and rumors that only add to its mystery. A ship meant to bring its passengers to new shores and adventures became a symbol of uncertainty and enigma, leaving behind only questions without answers. In this regard, the Mary Celeste remains one of the most mysterious ships in history. The first impression of the abandoned ship, when the boarding party stepped onto the Mary Celeste, was as if they had entered another dimension. The deck was empty, save for the gentle rocking of the vessel under an unfamiliar wind that whispered through the rigging, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Each step on the wood that once served as home to the crew echoed hollowly, as if the ship itself was trying to remind them of its past. The gaze fell upon untouched items left in place. Empty plates with uneaten food, open books that would never be read again, and personal belongings of the sailors. This ship, now a symbol of mystery, looked like a museum where time had stopped and life had fled forever. The wind howled in rhythm with the unsolved history, and it seemed as if the ocean itself was watching as the researchers wandered across its vast expanses. In such moments, one felt that not only had the crew left the Mary Celeste, but the very life on board had vanished, leaving behind only a ghost. On the deck, signs of life were visible. A solitary cigarette, an unfinished bottle of rum, remnants of charts that could have told of the sailors' plans and dreams, but now only added to the overall sense of abandonment. Inside the cabins, silence reigned, broken only by the creaking of the wood, which reminded of the time when people lived and worked here. This was all that had happened here, once part of a real life filled with hopes and fears? Or had the Mary Celeste become a victim of something greater than just human error? Every corner of this ship was steeped in mystery, and in every rustle, one could hear the echo of long-gone days. The disappearance of the crew became not just a fact, but a true legend shrouded in darkness and secrecy. And perhaps it is in this very enigma that the true power of the Mary Celeste lies. Inside the Mary Celeste, an atmosphere reigned as if time had stopped, and every object was waiting for its owners to return. The ship's unfinished plates sat on the table, and a sewing machine with an unfinished project lay nearby, its threads still dangling from the needle, as if someone had left their work in a hurry. The gaze inevitably fell on the personal belongings of the sailors. Old photographs capturing moments of happiness and letters written to loved ones, now forever unanswered. The walls of the cabins were adorned with maps marking routes, but none of them led to the solution of the enigma. Each cabin felt like a life that had been suddenly cut short. Even in the hold, filled with supplies, everything was neatly arranged. Barrels of provisions, neatly stacked sacks of flour, as if someone had been preparing for a festive dinner but had instead left forever. There were no signs of struggle or hasty evacuation, only silence and darkness. It did not resemble a catastrophe, but rather a mysterious disappearance, leaving all things in the same state as they were. Even in the corner of the hold stood a shelf with books, one of them open, as if holding its breath, waiting to be read again. The ghost of life that once filled this ship now only heightened the sense of strangeness. Each discovery and each object spoke of a life on the Mary Celeste that was rich and full. But in an instant, it all vanished, leaving only questions. A lone compass on the table pointed north, but it seemed that none of the crew had had time to use it on that fateful day. On the deck, Where the sun's rays filtered through, one could see the dust settling on the old maps, and it seemed as if even nature had ceased all movement in this place. The interior of the Mary Celeste was not just a collection of objects, but a real scene where each element emphasized the mystery of its disappearance. The inner standing in this, but now, on board the Mary Celeste, not only were forgotten items found, but also obvious gaps that only intensified the mystery of this ghost ship. The most significant thing that disappeared was the lifeboat, the sextant, and the chronometer. Why did the sextant, which could have helped determine the location, and the chronometer, necessary for navigation time calculations, also disappeared, raising many questions? Did the crew members decide that the situation did not require immediate action? Or did they simply not have time? The ship's log, which should have recorded the last events, was also inaccessible. The last entry was dated November 25th, leaving gaps in the chronology of events. While the most valuable cargo of spirits, including rum barrels that could have been a lifesaver in case of need, remained in place, the absence of these critically important items created a sense that the crew encountered something that forced them to leave the ship in a hurry, but with the clear intention of returning. Why leave such valuable cargo on board if their lives were at risk? It seems that the Mary Celeste became not just a ship, but a true symbol of inexplicable events. Researchers assumed that this could be the result of some external factors, such as a trick of nature or even human intervention. But none of the versions explain why the crew left the ship, leaving behind many important items. In every cabin, in every corner, everything remained in its place, as if time had stopped. But the three missing elements, the lifeboat, the sextant, and the chronometer, were keys to the mystery. Each of them has its own history, and their absence only emphasizes that something more than just a catastrophe happened on board the Mary Celeste. It seems that there was something mysterious that deprived the sailors of the ability to act, and this could not have been the result of an ordinary storm or hurricane. At every step on this abandoned ship, one felt the life that was suddenly interrupted, leaving behind questions that remain unanswered to this day. Captain Briggs was not just a captain, but a true leader who knew how to inspire his subordinates. His wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Frances, were with him on board, underscoring the family values that permeated his life. Sarah was not just his wife, but a loyal companion who assisted him in his maritime endeavors, while their daughter was a little sunbeam that brightened every day on board. The crew of the Mary Celeste consisted of 6 experienced sailors, each with strong ties to the captain. These men were not strangers. They had worked together for many years and had extensive experience in navigation and maritime affairs. They knew what it was like to face difficulties at sea, and none of them would have abandoned the ship without a good reason. It is hard to imagine that a group of experienced sailors, who knew every wave and every curve of the ocean, could have left the ship at that moment. This is not just a question of what they left behind. It is a question of what could have happened to make them act in such a way. Each of them had their own story, their own fears, and their own hopes. But on that day, they all found themselves facing something that changed their lives. Briggs knew that the responsibility for his family and crew rested on his shoulders, and none of them could have simply abandoned the ship, leaving behind everything they held dear. This entire situation raises questions and makes one think about what could have happened to put such an experienced captain and his crew in such a desperate situation. Considering that his family was on board, this adds another layer to this mysterious incident. Captain Briggs, despite his strength and experience, left us with many unanswered questions. Why did they leave? What could have made them abandon a reliable ship filled with resources and opportunities? The departure of the Mary Celeste from New York occurred on November 7, 1872, a day when many anticipated the beginning of a new adventure. Under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs, the ship set sail, filled with hopes and plans. On board, the crew prepared everything, checked the food, water, and fuel supplies, ready for the long journey across the Atlantic Ocean. There were no omens of misfortune, only confidence and hope for a successful voyage. However, days passed, and the Mary Celeste did not return to the port, causing growing concern. Around a month later, in early December, in the vicinity of the Azores, the Dei Gratia, another ship, noticed something unusual. On the horizon, approaching closer, he noticed that the sails of the Mary Celeste were raised, but the ship was deserted. This was strange, as no experienced sailor would leave their ship unguarded, even in the most dire circumstances. The crew of the Dei Gratia boarded the Mary Celeste and encountered a chilling emptiness. There were no signs of struggle or panic on the deck, but all personal belongings, including those of Briggs and his family, remained in place. Captain Johnson noticed that the food supplies were almost untouched, and water and provisions were abundant. This created a strange atmosphere filled with questions and bewilderment. Why had no one stayed on board? Where was the entire crew? The situation became increasingly baffling, and each new fact only added to the confusion. Captain Briggs and his crew had vanished, leaving behind only their equipment and a well-stocked ship, as if they had left in a hurry. This encounter with the Dei Gratia is not just a moment in history. It marks the beginning of one of the most perplexing maritime mysteries that has left a lasting impression on researchers and historians for many years. The Mary Celeste was found in a state that defied logical explanation. The ship seemed frozen in time, and even more than a century and a half later, its story continues to stir minds and ignite imagination. Discussing the theory of piracy in the context of the disappearance of the Mary Celeste reveals that it is one of the most widespread, yet most dubious theories. At first glance, it seems logical. Piracy was commonplace in those times, and unguarded ships were easy prey. However, delving deeper, this version begins to unravel. Firstly, when the Dei Gratia boarded the Mary Celeste, there were no signs of an attack. The deck showed no signs of struggle, and the personal belongings of the crew remained untouched. Typically, when pirates seize a ship, they leave nothing behind, taking all valuable items, including food, water, and personal belongings. On the Mary Celeste, supplies were abundant, clearly indicating that no one intended to leave the ship in a hurry. Furthermore, the pirate fleet operating in these waters was known to leave ships in ruins, not neatly packed and undamaged vessels. Moreover, it is worth considering that the Mary Celeste was a relatively small ship, and it is unlikely that pirates would have targeted it when larger and more valuable ships were nearby. The question of why pirates did not touch the cargo also remains unanswered. The ship carried valuable goods such as alcohol and other merchandise that could have fetched a good profit. If pirates had indeed seized the Mary Celeste, they would not have left these goods untouched. Ultimately, the piracy theory appears unconvincing. Not only the absence of violence, but also the intact cargo cast doubt on this theory. Additionally, if the Mary Celeste had indeed fallen victim to pirates, there would have been reports of the attack, and the incident would have been remembered as another case of maritime robbery. However, nothing of the sort happened. Furthermore, at first glance, this explanation seems plausible, as mutinies on board ships were not uncommon, especially during times when life at sea was often harsh, and the captain could become the object of hatred from his subordinates. However, a closer examination of the details makes this theory quite doubtful. Firstly, as with piracy, the absence of any signs of struggle on board is a crucial factor that casts doubt on this theory. When the Dei Gratia discovered the Mary Celeste, there was not a drop of blood or any damage that would indicate violence. Normally, when a mutiny occurs, one would expect chaos, screams, and possibly the use of weapons. However, in this case, everything was in perfect order. The personal belongings of the crew, including clothing and valuables, remained untouched, which also raises questions. If the sailors had decided to rebel against the captain, they would not have left their belongings behind, especially if they intended to escape in a lifeboat. Furthermore, the crew of the Mary Celeste consisted of experienced sailors who likely understood that a mutiny could lead to catastrophic consequences for everyone. Additionally, there were numerous laws and regulations governing behavior on board, and a mutiny would have been a highly risky step. Even if someone in the crew had actually planned a mutiny, the others might not have supported it, which again makes this theory unlikely. Moreover, there was a cargo of alcohol on board, and some members of the crew might have been under its influence, but this is not a reason for a mutiny. Rather, It could have led to temporary confusion, but not to an organized rebellion. A significant fact is that mutinies often result in the capture or damage of the ship, which did not happen with the Mary Celeste. The ship was found in excellent condition, with no signs of struggle or disorder, which casts doubt on the possibility of a mutiny. If the crew had indeed mutinied, they would likely have tried to capture the ship or, at the very least, destroy it. But this did not occur. The only explanation for such behavior could be that the crew abandoned the ship for reasons unrelated to violence. Taking all these facts into account, the mutiny theory also does not withstand scrutiny and appears to be one of many attempts to explain the mystery of the Mary Celeste, which remains unsolved to this day. The next theory on the list is that the disappearance of the Mary Celeste is connected to a sea monster or some other supernatural phenomenon. Imagine this: a ship sailing across the vast waters of the Atlantic, and suddenly, something terrifying appears on the horizon, causing the crew to panic and abandon the ship. But let's break down where this fantasy comes from. Firstly, sailors have long been subject to myths and legends. Tales of sea monsters, such as the Kraken or sirens, were passed down orally and often served as explanations for unexplained phenomena. It is quite possible that in times when there were no scientific explanations for various natural phenomena, fear of the unknown gave birth to such stories. However, when it comes to the Mary Celeste, one must ask, are there any real evidence supporting this version? While at sea, the crew could have encountered a severe storm, but this has nothing to do with monsters. Legends about sea monsters are often based on observations of unusual animals, such as giant squids or even whales. But they cannot explain why all the crew members disappeared, leaving the ship in perfect condition. Furthermore, if something truly threatening had appeared on the horizon, we would expect to find some signs or traces of a struggle. But there were none. Another point is that many researchers emphasize that this version has more in common with human psychology than with real events. Fear of the unknown generates many myths, and in the face of such mysteries as the Mary Celeste, they flourish. However, as practice shows, the disappearance of the Mary Celeste is the only unexplained case. Compare this with other historical events. Even in the most mysterious disappearances, there are always traces indicating the cause. Here, everything seems like a puzzle without any clues. Myths about sea monsters, although intriguing, cannot explain reality. The ship was found with an intact cargo deck and no signs of struggle, making this version no more than a folklore element. Taking all these facts into account, one can assert that the theory of a supernatural origin of the Mary Celeste disappearance belongs more to the realm of fiction than to the study of real events. The theory linking the natural phenomenon to the release of alcohol vapors appears more rational compared to mystical theories. The essence of this theory is that the Mary Celeste was carrying alcohol, which could evaporate, forming vapors capable of causing an explosion or even poisoning. At the time, the ship was fully loaded. Considering that the hold contained large barrels of ethanol, it is easy to imagine how careless handling could have led to a serious situation. The presence of vapors below deck could have frightened the crew, leading them to believe the ship was about to explode, prompting them to abandon it. This explains why they left their belongings, including personal items, money, and documents. However, if this were the primary cause, there should have been signs of panic on deck, scattered belongings, signs of struggle, or at least burned areas. None of this was found. Researchers discussing this version note that alcohol vapors can be extremely toxic, and in high concentrations, the crew could have lost consciousness, which could also explain their disappearance. However, such cases would be quite rare, and safety measures would typically be in place on board. Therefore, if this had happened, there should have been some evidence confirming the event. But on the Mary Celeste, nothing of the sort was found. This raised many questions remain unanswered. Why did the crew leave no notes? And why were no signs of explosion or poisoning found in the hold? Comparing this with other cases shows that similar incidents always leave behind evidence, while here we have a complete lack of clues. Therefore, Even if the release of alcohol vapors appears to be the most rational version, it cannot fully explain the mysterious disappearance of the Mary Celeste. The fate of the crew of the Mary Celeste continues to remain one of the most ominous and unsolved maritime mysteries. It seems that none of the proposed scenarios can fully explain the details of their disappearance. Research and speculations have been ongoing for over a century and a half, but none of the versions have been able to grasp the essence of what happened. The problem lies in the fact that we are dealing not just with a disappearance, but with a puzzle that seems to mock all attempts to solve it. Decades later, we still do not know what happened to the 10 sailors who left this world in the open ocean, leaving behind only an empty ship filled with questions. Analyzing numerous versions, from hurricanes to pirate attacks, one can conclude that each has its weaknesses. The theory about alcohol fumes, although seemingly logical, leaves no traces, and other hypotheses, such as an attack, suffer from a lack of evidence. Furthermore, it is worth noting that at that time, the sea was teeming with pirates, and such attacks did occur. But in this case, there are no signs of any aggression. Additionally, if the crew had indeed encountered pirates, the remaining items, documents, and money on board would not have been left unattended. The supplies and personal belongings left in the hold also do not support the theory of robbery. As for the mystical versions, they only add fuel to the fire, causing confusion and speculation, but do not bring clarity. It seems each year new theories emerge, but they only add to the atmosphere of mystery rather than clarifying the fate of the crew. And so, after more than a century and a half, we still stand in the same place, looking at this eerie emptiness framed by the waves of the ocean, hoping that one day someone will shed light on what happened to the Mary Celeste. Each new document, each new witness, each new discovery underscores that this story is not just a maritime enigma, but something more that makes us ponder the complexity and unpredictability of our world. Ultimately, Mary Celeste will remain in history not only as a ship, but also as an important symbol of human curiosity and the desire to unravel mysteries that seemed to be forever unsolved. The tendency to seek answers remains unabated, and despite all the speculations, the reality is such that there will be no answers to the questions about the fate of the crew. Imagine one beautiful day, when nothing seemed amiss, Ellen Austin encountered another ship, a derelict schooner shrouded in mystery. This abandoned vessel, much like the Mary Celeste, inspired both fear and awe. The crew of Ellen Austin approached the caravel, but to their surprise, there was no one aboard. No signs of struggle, no clues, only emptiness filling the space. Deciding that this could be a stroke of luck, the captain of Ellen Austin resolved to tow this mysterious ship back to port. But that's when the real strangeness began. The crew decided to take a few items from the caravel on board, hoping it would bring them good fortune. But the next morning, when they woke up, they were met with a shock. The caravel had simply vanished, as if it had never existed. All that remained was the silent sea and many questions. The captain was bewildered, but decided to search for the missing ship. And that's when the truly bizarre began. For several days, Ellen Austin continued to search for the caravel. But each time they approached the last known location, the ship would vanish again. It was like a nightmare where reality blended with fantasy, and each new hope was dashed. The crew began to panic, and the atmosphere on board became increasingly tense. Nothing could explain this inexplicable phenomenon, and each day became a struggle for reason and calm. Eventually, after several days of searching, the captain, concluding that it was a curse, left the caravel alone and returned to his original mission. But the story of Ellen Austin did not end there. This strange incident was discussed in maritime circles, and many sought explanations, linking it to myths and legends of lost ships and sea ghosts. With each new account, the significance of this event grew more mysterious. The captain of Ellen Austin returned to port and continued his voyages, but his story remained forever in the memory of sailors as an example of how, on the sea, things sometimes happen that defy explanation. Each new tale of Ellen Austin and her ghostly the caravel only added fuel to the fire and ignited interest in this mysterious occurrence. The mystery of the caravel's disappearance remains unsolved, and perhaps it is this very uncertainty that makes it so captivating to researchers. The unknown has always drawn people in, and the schooner Ellen Austen served as a vivid example of how maritime life can be not only risky, but also full of riddles that the mind cannot comprehend. When Ellen Austen continued her journey across the vast ocean expanses, the crew suddenly spotted a silhouette on the horizon. It was a ship, drifting in the waters of the Atlantic, and its appearance stirred a mix of curiosity and caution among the sailors. As they approached, they discovered that it was a schooner, seemingly in perfect condition. The mast stood proudly against the sky. The sails hung as if waiting for a command to unfurl, and the hull gleamed in the sunlight, unmarred by any scratch. At first, no one could believe their eyes. How could a ship, clearly intact and undamaged, simply drift without a crew? There were no signs of struggle, no damage, just emptiness and silence. The crew of Ellen Austen discussed nervously what to do. Some suggested approaching immediately to check if there was anyone on board, while others were convinced it was a bad omen and they should stay away. However, curiosity won out, and the captain gave the order to approach the schooner. There was no one on board, and this was astonishing. Even the most basic items necessary for life on a ship were in place. Food supplies, tools, personal belongings. Everything indicated that the ship had not just been abandoned, but rather it seemed to have been left in an instant, as if its crew had vanished suddenly. With each passing minute, the atmosphere on board became more charged, and the question of what to do with this schooner became increasingly pressing. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't make sense of how a whole ship could end up in such a state and what had really happened. Feeling the growing tension, the captain decided to act. He ordered the Ellen Austen flag to be raised and attempted to establish contact with the ship, but there was no response. This only intensified the mystery surrounding the ship. Finally, when Ellen Austen was close enough to begin an inspection, the crew noticed that nothing on board had changed. Everything seemed as if time had stopped. Each step on the decks of the abandoned schooner reminded them of an eerie presence, causing the sailors to exchange glances filled with worry and bewilderment. This moment marked a turning point in their journey, for not every day do you encounter a ship that appears completely intact but empty, as if alive. The state of the schooner raised questions that were unlikely to be answered. Captain Ellen Austen could not shake off the thought that this drifting ship might be a real treasure. Such a find in open waters was not just a coincidence, but an opportunity that should not be missed, especially since the schooner seemed to have been left only for a moment. He gathered his crew, and in the eyes of each sailor, he saw excitement. "Why not take this ship with us?" he said, his voice confident and resolute. The idea of taking the schooner as a prize seemed incredibly appealing, especially considering that all necessary supplies remained on board. As he looked, unlike his sailors, who were still hesitant, he already envisioned returning home with a prize that would arouse envy among other captains. But there was a question: how to send part of the crew to the abandoned schooner? He quickly realized that the risk should be shared. Captain proposed sending a group of 4 sailors to inspect and possibly take control of the new ship. This decision threw the crew into confusion. Some sailors openly objected, asserting that leaving people on a ghostly ship was not just a risk, but sheer stupidity. "What if it's a curse?" they whispered, looking at the masts that seemed ominous against the setting sun. But the captain's enthusiasm was infectious, and soon most of them agreed. The selection of sailors was quick, and soon 4 brave souls were gathering their belongings, preparing to move to the schooner. The atmosphere on board Ellen Austen became tense but filled with anticipation. Each sailor knew that they could become part of something extraordinary, even if it was fraught with danger. When the sailors boarded the schooner, the captain left them with clear instructions. Check if there's anyone left on board and try to find some explanation for this paradox. They, holding their breath, stepped onto the deck, feeling a slight chill. Each step seemed to them not just a step on wood, but a step into the unknown. They quickly inspected the cabin, and soon one of the sailors found personal belongings: an old jacket, worn boots, and a strange amulet. This only intensified the atmosphere of unease. If someone had been here, where did they go? Meanwhile, another sailor found an old map, lost among the things, on which several islands were marked, but no information about the schooner or its fate. The crew of Ellen Austin, observing all these events from the main ship, awaited the results with impatience and fear. Captain, remaining on Ellen Austin, watched the process with growing excitement. He understood that this discovery could change their fate. If everything went smoothly, they would return with a prize that could serve as the basis for new adventures. However, doubts gnawed at him. What if it was indeed a curse? But at the moment when his team began to inspect the ship, he could not allow himself to think negatively. The atmosphere was filled with anticipation, as if the sea itself was looking forward to the resolution of this story. Soon, one of the sailors returned to Ellen Austin, holding the very find, the map, and with each of his steps, the captain felt his enthusiasm grow. This could be their chance for new horizons and adventures. The captain, clinging to the wheel, tried to keep the ship on course when, to his surprise, he spotted the very ship they had intended to capture. At that moment, it seemed to merge with the sea itself. Like a living creature, the schooner swayed on the surface. But then a strong gust of wind came, and it vanished from sight, as if dissolved into the fog. The crew couldn't believe their eyes. Just moments ago, they had seen it, but now there was only the raging sea and grey clouds all around. "Where did it go?" one of the sailors asked, looking at the captain in bewilderment. The question echoed like a challenge, as if the storm itself was whispering about some ominous foreboding. The fog enveloped the sea, and the Ellie Austin found itself in an unknown realm where reality seemed distorted. At first, the captain hoped it was just an optical illusion, but soon realized that the schooner might have simply vanished. These were not just fears, but genuine concerns that they had lost the chance at a prize that promised wealth and adventure. As the crew's hope began to fade, anxiety grew. Each sailor, as if knowing their fate hung in the balance, looked into the fog, searching for any sign. No sound, only the roar of the storm and the whistle of the wind. The captain, trying to maintain his composure, struggled to suppress the growing sense of unease. He knew that such a disappearance was not just a coincidence. It could be something more sinister. Meanwhile, memories of tales of sea ghosts and cursed ships that had once left their harbors and never returned surfaced. Now, these seemed not just like myths, but a real threat. As the fog thickened, the crew of the Ellie Austin began to realize that perhaps they had become part of this eerie story. Suddenly, one of the sailors cried out, pointing in the direction where the schooner had been. "Look!" His voice echoed as if it had risen from the depths of fear. All eyes turned to the same spot, but there was nothing there. No schooner, no ghostly ship, only the vast, increasingly gloomy sea. As if it itself had decided not to reveal its secrets. The storm continued to rage, and the captain, realizing time was running out, made a decision. "We'll follow the compass and continue our journey." It was a risk, but he knew that staying in this fog was pointless. The Ellie Austin left the place where the ghost ship had vanished, and with each turn of the wheel, the captain felt the weight of the stormy night pressing down on him. Their path was filled with uncertainty, but this was their only chance to avoid encountering whatever had become a mystery. It was unclear what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. On this sea, every decision could be fatal, and every discovery could be a harbinger of new horrors. Suddenly, the captain's heart quickened as he realized it was not just a figment of his imagination or a trick of the eye. "Drop anchor!" he shouted, and the crew, filled with mixed emotions, carried out his command. They found themselves once more before this mysterious ship, but there was not a single soul on board. No sailors, no captain, only the wind howling in the sails, as if beckoning them to approach. The captain, his hands trembling with excitement, pointed at the ship. "Look, it's here again! How is this possible?" His voice was filled with bewilderment and fear, and the eyes of the sailors reflected not only surprise, but also terror. They remembered how they had just lost sight of this ship, and now that it had reappeared, the question of what had happened to it only grew stronger. It was as if the sea itself was playing a sinister game, revealing and concealing its secrets. One of the sailors, his voice trembling, said, "Isn't this a curse? Why can't we find the crew?" His words hung in the air, and silence fell over the crew, like a fog enveloping them. The captain, gathering his thoughts, decided they needed to get closer to investigate what had happened on this mysterious ship. "Prepare the longboat! We must explore!" he commanded. And despite their fear, the sailors began lowering the longboat into the water. Each movement, each word echoed like a challenge to fate. As soon as the longboat was lowered, the captain and a few brave sailors climbed in, while the rest remained on board, filling the atmosphere with tension. They rowed towards the ghost ship, and with each stroke of the oars, the sound of the water grew louder, as if the sea was trying to stop them. There was no sign of life on board, and the captain felt a sense of foreboding. As they approached the ship, they noticed that the schooner looked as if it had been abandoned in haste. Dishes remained on the tables, and in one of the cabins, a door was left open, as if someone had rushed out in terror. "Where did the crew go?" one of the sailors whispered, and his words seemed to cut through the air. The interior of the ship was dark and neglected, as if it had been a victim of time. "Suddenly, they couldn't have just vanished. They must be here somewhere," he said hopefully, but fear was already creeping into his voice. Each step, each sound echoed through the empty space, and the atmosphere grew increasingly ominous. Suddenly, one of the sailors cried out, pointing towards the stern, "Look, something is floating there." All eyes turned in that direction, and they saw something glinting on the water's surface. It was strange, perhaps an object belonging to the crew. The captain, not waiting for explanations, rushed to the edge, but in that moment, a sense of impending doom struck him. As if in response to his fear, the wind rose again, and the schooner began to creak. The crew of Ellen Austin found themselves at a crossroads. What should they do with this mysterious ship that had already twice deceived them? The captain, overcome with emotion, gathered the remaining sailors and explained the plan. They must once again attempt to board the ghostly ship. "We must find out what happened to the crew and perhaps take something as a memento," he said, though his voice sounded uncertain. The sailors exchanged glances, each realizing that this endeavor might be their last. As soon as they boarded the ship, the captain felt that something had changed. The atmosphere around them became even more oppressive, as if the ship itself was rejecting their presence. This time, when the crew began to explore the abandoned quarters, they noticed that everything seemed frozen in time. Dishes remained on the tables, and in one of the cabins, items were still scattered as if left in haste. But this time, there were no signs that could indicate where the crew had gone. Suddenly, this was strange, as the compass should have indicated north, not created illusions. The captain took it in his hands and felt a chill run down his spine. "This definitely belonged to the crew," he said, but his voice no longer held the confidence it had before. With each passing minute, the ship seemed more sinister, the walls appearing to close in around them. Suddenly, as if on cue, the wind rose, and a creaking sound echoed across the deck, as if the ship itself was rising against their presence. "We must leave," the captain said, feeling fear grip him. But then something terrible happened. The ship, as if dissolving into the air, began to disappear before their eyes. First, it darkened, then became transparent, and soon it was just a mirage in the stormy sea. The crew watched in horror as their hands, which had just touched the deck, now felt nothing. "This is impossible!" one of the sailors cried out, his voice sounding as if he was trying to wake them from a nightmare. But this was no dream. The ship disappeared forever, taking all the answers with it. The captain, left alone on his boat, felt his heart tighten with loss. "Return to what remains," he ordered, and the sailors, disbelieving their eyes, rowed back to the Ellen Austin. Silent, they left the place where the ship had disappeared, but the feeling remained that this was only the beginning of their adventures, and the mysteries of this sea would never be unraveled. The story of Ellie Austin is not just another maritime legend. It is a whole tradition passed down through the centuries, like an old, worn-out compass pointing nowhere. Legends, no matter how you look at them, have their own lives, and it is their repetition that makes them particularly captivating and frightening. The question of the authenticity of such stories always takes center stage, and rightly so. With each telling, details change, new elements are added, but the essence remains the same: the mysterious disappearance, ghosts of the past, and unsolved mysteries. We can argue for a long time about whether the crew of Ellie Austin truly vanished without a trace or simply decided to leave their seafaring lives behind. But the emotions this story evokes speak for themselves. It penetrates deep into the soul and sends shivers down the spine. Remembering how the sailors encountered what awaited them on the ship, one cannot help but ask, what really happened? Perhaps it is all just a fantasy, but behind every legend lie real fears and experiences of those who once sailed the oceans. In maritime journeys, there is nothing more frightening than the unknown, and Ellie Austin has become a symbol of this fear. It reminds us that the sea is not just a resource. It is a living entity that can take away everything we love. And it is this idea that we can lose everything in an instant that makes us return to this story again and again. Each time someone tells the story of Ellie Austin, they become a part of this endless narrative, like sea foam that covers the shores of our perception. This legend continues to live, like something ominous and elusive, capable of capturing the imagination and igniting interest. That is why we should pay attention to such stories. They show how powerful human imagination can create myths based on real events. So, the next time someone tells you about Ellie Austin, remember that it is not just a fairy tale, but a reflection of the fears and hopes of sailors who once left the shores in search of adventure. The psychological aspect of the mystery of Ellie Austin reveals the deep-seated fears that have haunted people for centuries. Within each of us, there is something sinister lurking in our subconscious, connected to the unknown. Vast expanses of water where not only ships, but also destinies have been lost, intertwine in an endless web of riddles. The sea is perceived not only as a physical space, but also as a metaphor for life, where each of us can find ourselves on the brink of disappearance. This story hides not only the terror of loss, but also the fear of oneself. What can we lose when we break away from familiar shores? Each sea voyage becomes a test where hope and despair, courage and cowardice collide. Consider why stories like Ellie Austin captivate our imagination. They lay bare the vulnerability of a person who, despite all their achievements, always remains on the edge of disaster. We, like sailors, navigate the unknown, and it is this uncertainty that makes us feel fear. Recall how many sailors, setting out on a voyage, prayed for luck, as if seeking protection from the unpredictability of the ocean. This fear of the unknown is a universal feeling that knows no bounds. Even if we are on land, the traces of those who dared to cross the seas remain in our consciousness, and their stories of lost ships continue to make us tremble. Often, when we encounter the mysteries of the past, it seems that they reflect not only historical events, but also our own internal struggles. This feeling that life can change for the worse in an instant creates an atmosphere of tension. Ellie Austin becomes a symbol of this fear, as if the story itself says, "Do not forget that behind the horizon, something terrible may be hidden." Each time we speak of her disappearance, we may be trying to understand what it means to be a human. In a world, this is not just the sea. It is a space where the worst fears are realized. And if we are not ready to look into its depths, we may lose not only ships, but ourselves. The story of Ellie Austin serves as a kind of mirror, reflecting our fears and desires, stripping us of illusions, and forcing us to think about what happens when a person encounters the power of nature. It is mysteries like this indicate that human imagination knows no bounds, and it is the fear of the emptiness of the ocean, which can swallow everything we know, that drives us to continue seeking answers. The ocean is not just a smooth surface, it is a deep abyss where our fears, hopes, and dreams are hidden. Now, this place, known for its ominous nickname, the Atlantic Graveyard, has been the stage for numerous tragedies, and Cape Hatteras has been the epicenter of maritime disasters. In the early 1920s, amidst the fierce storms and underwater reefs, one of the most enigmatic stories unfolded. The yacht Carroll Deering owned by a wealthy businessman, disappeared under mysterious circumstances in these treacherous waters. The places where the waves crash are shrouded in mist and fear, attracting not only adventurers, but also those who seek to unravel the mysteries carried away by the vast expanse of the ocean. In this region, where seagulls cry and storms rage, the waters hide not only ships, but also the fates of those who dared to challenge the power of nature. The entire Atlantic coastline here is filled with legends of lost ships and missing sailors, emphasizing the fragility of human life in the face of the elements. The story of Carroll Deering begins at the end of January 1926, when the yacht left the port heading to California. Unlike many other ships, its captain, Christopher K. Kerr, was an experienced sailor, and nothing seemed to foreshadow disaster. On board, terrible local. Due to this gloomy reputation, many believed that the yacht had become another victim of the mysterious waters. The more time passed, the more rumors emerged about what had happened on board the Deering. Some said on the shore. For several weeks after the yacht's disappearance, search groups scoured vast areas, but in vain. The thought that something on the ocean floor could tell the story of the Deering's fate did not leave many in peace. In the end, the story of Carroll Deering. On Deering, local fishermen, accustomed to the ocean's harsh whims, spotted a 5-masted schooner stranded on the Diamond Shoals sandbars. Initially, they thought it was just another storm victim, but as they approached, they were struck by what they saw. The ship looked perfect, as if it had just been launched, with no scratches on the hull, neatly folded sails, and all rigging in order. Yet there was a puzzle. There was no one on board. The emptiness on the yacht was eerie. It felt as if someone had just left it, like a fog over the sea. The fishermen, bewildered by their discovery, began discussing what might have happened. One of them, an old sailor named James, remembered local rumors about the Carroll Deering. Around the schooner, locals began to gather, some bringing their boats to get closer. Their eyes gleamed with curiosity and a touch of fear. Meanwhile, Deering, everything seemed as if life had stopped abruptly. Unfinished tasks on the table and food supplies in the hold, as if the crew had simply stood up and left, forgetting time and place. But where could they be? Some said the schooner might have hit an underwater rock, while others suggested the crew could have encountered pirates who forced them to abandon the ship. As news of the discovery spread, the rumors became increasingly fantastical. The empty ship became a symbol of an unsolved enigma, and soon a mythology began to form around it, both intriguing and frightening. Every corner of the schooner, every detail of its equipment seemed to ask, where are they? The story of Carroll Deering soon became part of local culture, and even years after its discovery, people continued to tell tales of what happened on that fateful night on the desolate ocean. When the sails seemed to be raised, as if the crew had just prepared to set sail, but the boats that could have been used for escape were missing. This caused confusion. Where could the sailors have gone if the ship was ready to depart? There was not a single living soul on deck, adding to the already ominous discovery. The emptiness of the schooner resembled a scene from a horror film. Everything looked as if the actors had vanished in an instant, leaving only the sets behind. Inside, in the cabins, there was silence, and in the hold, there were supplies of food, as if the crew had simply stood up and left, forgetting about time. It seemed, for example, none of the crew's personal belongings were found, as if they had left the ship, leaving all their possessions behind. This was unusual for sailors who always took care of their belongings. People who had never believed in the supernatural suddenly began to discuss the possibility that Carroll Deering had become a victim of dark forces, which had taken them to the depths. Others insisted that the crew could have fallen victim to pirates who operated in these waters. Stepping back, it was clear that all these theories, although they seemed absurd, became part of the local folklore tradition, weaving myths and legends around the schooner. The mystery continued to live on, stirring the minds and hearts of those who had ever heard of Carroll Deering. It was as if nature itself, in the form of raging waves and fierce winds, kept silent, not wanting to reveal the secret it knew. In the end, the schooner Carroll Deering. During a meticulous inspection of the schooner, Carroll Deering, researchers discovered a series of remarkable details that only intensified the mystery of the crew's disappearance. In the gap, personal belongings of the sailors, such as clothing, books, and even some photographs, remained in place. However, while all this pointed to the crew simply disappearing without a trace, crucial elements were missing: ship logs, navigational equipment, and the anchor. This raised many questions. Who could have taken these items and why? The absence of the anchor, the primary means of securing the ship in place, was not only noticeable, but also caused alarming thoughts. Regardless, the fact remained. The ship was left without essential items that could have aided in the investigation. Each newly discovered item only emphasized the strangeness of the situation and added another layer of mystery to the overall picture. This anomaly, where traces of life remained but key elements were missing, seemed to hint at something more than just the disappearance of the crew. Against this backdrop, the schooner Carroll Deering continued to maintain its gloomy atmosphere, and the researchers could only speculate about what had truly happened on board. His crew consisted of 6 men, each with their own skills and experience, making them a cohesive team. However, on January 28th, when the ship passed the Cape Lookout lighthouse, the lookout noticed something unusual about the crew's behavior. He described the sailors as being in a state of panic or stress. Their movements were hurried, and their conversations were loud and anxious. This behavior concerned the lookout, and he even considered whether the crew needed assistance. At that moment, no one could have imagined that this would be the last known observation of the schooner's crew. The lookout remembered how tense Captain May looked. His face was focused, as if he was trying to solve an unsolvable problem. This scene served as a prelude to the mysterious events that followed. None of the crew members could have predicted that they would disappear just a few days later, leaving behind an empty ship and numerous questions. It is interesting to note that during this period, before their disappearance, a strange tension seemed to have taken hold on the schooner. Many researchers studying the case of the missing crew have noted this. Perhaps Captain May and his crew had reasons for concern that were not visible from the outside. Given that personal belongings of the sailors were found on board, it can be inferred that each of them continued to perform their duties, while something sinister was happening. Questions about what could have caused experienced sailors to abandon their ship in a hurry remain unanswered. Investigators encountered numerous theories, from storm warnings to the possibility of pirate attacks, but none of these theories could explain all the details. When Carroll Deering, no traces indicated that the crew had encountered danger, but their strange behavior before their disappearance became a subject of discussion among researchers and historians. Each new fact raised more questions than it answered, and the mystery of the schooner continued to shroud itself in secrecy. The lack of clear reasons for panic and the crew's strange behavior only added fuel to the fire. Among the numerous theories explaining the disappearance of the schooner Carroll Deering, one of the most intriguing involves piracy and smuggling, especially in the context of the Prohibition era in the United States. This period, which began in the early 1920s, became a paradise for smugglers who supplied alcohol to the country despite the ban. The business was so successful that many sailors actively participated in it, turning their ships into true runners. It is worth noting that in the waters where the schooner disappeared, such groups were active, and it is quite possible that the crew of Carroll Deering could have encountered similar smugglers. However, even if they had met with runners, this does not explain the absence of the crew's bodies. Additionally, no reports of attacks were recorded in the area of the schooner's disappearance, which casts doubt on this version. Nevertheless, Deering could have been not just a victim of piracy, but part of a more complex scheme related to smuggling. If the crew was indeed involved, their panic could have been caused by the fear of exposure or threats from competitors. However, all these theories cannot explain why none of the crew members were found after the disappearance. Often in such cases, many questions remain, and searchers only raise more. Smugglers could have destroyed the evidence, but the absence of bodies leads to the fact that dark suspicions of violence and chaos remain only hypotheses. The complexity of the situation is exacerbated by the fact that personal belongings of sailors were found on board the schooner. indicating that they did not leave the ship voluntarily, which means something unexpected must have happened. All this among the many theories about the mysterious disappearance of the schooner Carroll Deering, there is another equally intriguing one: a mutiny on board. This theory is based on rumours of possible conflicts between Captain May and his first mate. In those times, it was not uncommon for captains and their subordinates to have difficulties finding common ground. An insatiable thirst for power, personal ambitions, and differing approaches to managing the ship could have sparked growing tension. A captain, with experience and authority, might not always consider the opinion of his first mate, which could lead to dissatisfaction and quarrels. However, even if these relationships were strained, a mutiny does not explain the absence of the crew's bodies. If a rebellion had indeed taken place, there would be signs of struggle, blood, perhaps even remnants of personal belongings of the crew that could testify to a violent conflict. It is unclear how the crew could simply vanish without a trace. Even if we assume that the conflict reached a critical point where one of the crew members decided to rebel against the captain, such actions should have left clear evidence. However, no reports of struggle, no signs of violence were found on the ship. The discovery of personal items of sailors on board confirms that they did not leave the ship voluntarily, which casts doubt on the mutiny theory. In this case, perhaps the mutineers were forced to leave the ship for some other reason, but this raises even more questions about what really happened. The absence of bodies, signs of struggle, and even hints of violence make this version no less mysterious than the others. All these circumstances only emphasize how tangled the story of Carroll Deering is. Rumours of conflict between the captain and the first mate continue to stir the minds of researchers, but ultimately, they do not provide a clear answer to the question of what happened to the crew. A mutiny may be one of many factors, but without specific evidence, it remains a hypothesis shrouded in many mysteries. The next version that interests researchers is the theory about a strong storm or natural phenomenon that could have caused the disappearance of the schooner Carroll Deering. Storms at sea have always been dangerous and unpredictable. And in those times when modern meteorological technologies did not exist, sailors often found themselves caught in the grip of nature. Imagine this. Suddenly, out of nowhere, clouds gather on the horizon, the wind begins to howl, and the sea, which was calm just a moment ago, becomes turbulent. The crew might not have had time to prepare for the impending threat, and in panic, they might have decided to abandon the ship to save themselves. If the storm was indeed so strong, as one might assume, where are the signs of the struggle for survival? Around the ship, there should have been debris, crew members' belongings that could testify to what happened on board during the storm. Even a hurricane capable of tearing masts could not have erased all traces. Moreover, if the crew did indeed abandon the ship, how did they manage to do so in the midst of such turmoil? If there were lifeboats on board, they should have been found, but none were discovered, which casts doubt on the credibility of this version. Furthermore, many witnesses who lived in those places claim that on the day Carroll Deering disappeared, the weather was quite calm, and there was no storm. This fact casts doubt on the possibility that the crew abandoned the ship due to a natural disaster. All possible meteorological conditions could be verified through archival records, and they do not confirm the presence of a storm during that period, making the theory about a natural phenomenon less likely. As a result, the disappearance without a trace is not just a mystery, but a real puzzle that requires a deeper analysis. There are scenarios where a storm could have been one of the factors, but the lack of evidence only underscores the complexity and multi-layered nature of this case, leaving researchers puzzled about what really happened to the crew. The next version worth discussing is the theory linking the disappearance of the schooner Carroll Deering with the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. How could a ship, which initially sailed with a clear course, suddenly vanish, as if it was swallowed by the abyss? Researchers fascinated by this story often include it among the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle, adding an extra layer of mystique and intrigue. One of the most popular theories suggests that the schooner might have entered the notorious triangle, where strange phenomena are said to occur. Ships disappear without a trace, and compasses behave erratically. This version posits that Carroll Deering could have encountered some mysterious anomalous field that disoriented the crew and led to their disappearance. However, let's examine this with a cool head. If such a supernatural phenomenon had occurred, why would there be no evidence? If the crew had encountered something extraordinary, how would the absence of notes or distress signals be explained? Additionally, it is important to note that at that time, the sea was well explored, and such anomalies lacked scientific confirmation. Furthermore, the idea that a ship could vanish in such a place, where a confluence of circumstances led to disappearances, seems too convenient an explanation. This is a case where a mystical explanation is superimposed on a real problem. In this, Deering only adds fuel to the fire, igniting public interest and drawing attention to this enigmatic geographical area. However, if we turn to the facts, we can observe that none of the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle have been scientifically proven, and each had its own explanations. In this context, linking the disappearance of the schooner solely to the mystique of the Bermuda Triangle is nothing more than an attempt to hide reality behind a veil of fog. Scientific research in this area shows that most disappearances can be explained by ordinary natural phenomena, not by something supernatural. Ultimately, despite its allure, the version of the Bermuda Triangle as the culprit behind the disappearance of Carroll Deering does not withstand scrutiny and becomes another mystery that requires solid factual evidence. Carroll Deering remains one of the most ominous maritime mysteries of the Atlantic, and despite the years that have passed since its disappearance, the story of this ship continues to haunt the minds of researchers and enthusiasts of mysteries. Surrounding the schooner is an aura of mystique and unsolved enigmas, and this is not coincidental. A ship that set sail with a clear purpose suddenly vanished, leaving behind only traces on the water and a multitude of questions. Each new fact related to Carroll Deering adds intrigue to this story. For example, it is known that at the time of the schooner's disappearance, its holds contained provisions and fuel, which casts doubt on the assumption that the crew could have become lost or found themselves in a hopeless situation. Moreover, subsequent search operations did not yield any results. No wreckage, no traces, not even a hint that something had happened. This suggests that the disappearance of Carroll Deering was not just a coincidence, but a reflection of deeper problems underlying human interaction with the sea. It is worth noting that in the history of navigation, there have been other cases of ships vanishing without a trace, but Carroll Deering stands out among them due to its mysterious fate and the lack of obvious explanations. Some researchers even suggest that this disappearance could have been connected to criminal activities, such as pirates or smugglers who might have seized the ship. However, this is just one of many versions, and as practice shows, without substantial evidence, such hypotheses remain at the level of speculation. Against the backdrop of all these theories, it is important to note that Carroll Deering not only disappeared, but also left behind a legacy that continues to stir the minds. Researchers, sailors, and enthusiasts of mysteries gather around this story, like bees around honey, trying to unravel the mystery that seems to become more complex with each passing year. The art of telling the story of Carroll Deering has become part of the cultural heritage of sailors, symbolizing the eternal search for answers to questions that may never be resolved. Remarkably, even after decades, the story continues to spark debates, and each new publication on the topic generates heated discussions among professionals and enthusiasts alike. Thus, Carroll Deering has become not just a maritime enigma, but a cultural phenomenon that continues to generate interest and discussion. No facts can erase this legacy, which has become part of maritime mythology. In this context, Carroll Deering is not just a vanished ship, but a symbol of endless searches for truth amidst the vast expanses of the ocean. The disappearance of the schooner remains an unsolved puzzle that may never receive a definitive answer, but continues to attract attention and fuel interest in maritime mysteries. The Arctic, with its boundless expanses and icy landscapes, has always been the stage for great human ambitions and tragedies. During times when nature dictates its own laws, and any attempts to conquer it end in failure. In this steamship designed for operation in Arctic waters, became a symbol not only of human courage, but also of the ruthless nature of the elements. Bachamo was built to withstand the harshest conditions that the Arctic could offer, but history shows that even the most robust ships can fall victim to the elements. From the moment it set sail, the ship encountered numerous difficulties, from unpredictable ice fields to sudden storms that could turn even the calmest day into a hellish nightmare. Soon after its departure, Bachamo ventured into the heart of the icy wilderness, a journey that was to be its last. The captain and crew faced harsh conditions, foul weather, and icebergs that threatened to tear the ship apart. Soon after, contact with the ship was lost, and it disappeared from the radar, leaving only traces on the water's surface. The disappearance of Bachamo became a mystery for sailors and researchers who tried to unravel what had happened to the crew and the ship itself. Legends about this ship spread quickly, and soon Bachamo became a part of Arctic mythology. They said that its ghost wandered through the icy expanses, and sailors who found themselves in these waters often heard mysterious sounds, as if someone was calling for help. Unlike many other ships that simply vanished, Bachamo became a symbol not only of abandonment and despair, but also of numerous speculations and theories. Some claimed that the ship was trapped in ice fields, while others suggested that the crew might have encountered something unimaginable that changed their fates forever. With each passing year, interest in Bachamo grew, and even today, its story remains relevant. Various expeditions have been sent in search of the ship's remains, but none have been successful. No facts can erase this legacy, and even after many years, the story of Bachamo continues to stir the minds of researchers and lovers of maritime mysteries. We see it became an integral part of the economic system, contributing to the development of trade between European colonies and indigenous peoples. Since its launch in 1931, Bachamo has been a symbol of reliability and strength, ready to withstand the harsh conditions of the Arctic. This ship, as it traveled along the coast, Bachamo became part of a unique Arctic ecosystem where humans and nature coexisted in a constant struggle for survival. The ship, with its powerful steam engines and civilizational cargo, set sail, leaving behind the bustle of peaceful life. But with each departure into open waters, there was not only hope for a successful voyage, but also fear of the unpredictability of nature. With each new voyage, Bachamo encountered ice barriers that could appear out of nowhere, and its crew was always ready to face the elements. Each return to port was a time of anticipation and celebration. But each departure into the sea left behind a faint sense of unease, as no one could guarantee that it would return. But even decades after its disappearance, the memory of its voyages lives on, and interest in this ship does not wane. Many researchers and historians continue to study its roots and fate, hoping to unravel the mysteries it left behind. Information about Bachamo and its activities remains a subject of discussion and debate, as there are many uncertainties and gaps in its history that only fuel interest in it. In October 1931, Bachamo encountered one of the most challenging situations in its history. Located near Alaska, the ship found itself trapped in a field of ice, which in an instant transformed it from a symbol of hope into a symbol of despair. The crew, consisting of experienced sailors, understood that the sea conditions could change at any moment. But when the ship became stuck, they were faced with a reality that left no hope for salvation. The ice, which had previously seemed like just an obstacle on their path, now became a true prison, and no one could predict when or if Bachamo would be able to escape this trap. As a result, the command decided to evacuate the crew, considering the ship to be hopelessly stuck or even sinking. This decision was a real blow to the sailors. Bachamo was not just a ship, it was their home, their means of livelihood, and the link to the world. Leaving the ship behind, each of them felt as if a part of their life was left in this icy prison. Abandoned at that moment, Bachamo became more than just a ship. It became a symbol of loss and disappointment. And in a world where nature can suddenly take control, the crew left hope for the salvation of their ship, which was already beginning to sink into the icy silence. Even years after this tragedy, many wondered, what happened to Bachamo after it was abandoned? With each new discovery about Bachamo, its story becomes even more mysterious, and the ship itself becomes a part of Arctic folklore, where nature and human ambitions are intertwined in an eternal struggle for survival. Just a few days after the crew left the vessel, they returned for supplies, filled with hope, but also with a heavy heart. Is there anything more terrible than seeing one's home left to the mercy of fate? And when the sailors approached the place where they had left Bachamo, they were confronted with a stunning and frightening sight. The ship, which they had thought lost, was floating in open water, but without people on board. It was like a miracle, or rather, a sinister omen. The ship, in essence, had risen from the dead. Snow and ice, which had held it captive so tightly, suddenly retreated, and Bachamo found itself free, slowly drifting on the waters as if seeking its way back to life. However, when the sailors got closer, they were overwhelmed with confusion. A large part of the cargo had been removed, and the ship itself looked like a lifeless skeleton left adrift at sea. Yes, Bachamo had returned, but its return was overshadowed by the shadow of loss. What had once been a cargo full of hopes and expectations was now reduced to empty holds. Some believe that changes in weather conditions, which softened the icy environment, played a role in its salvation. Others suggest that the ship, demonstrating remarkable resilience, somehow managed to break free from the icy bonds. However, in essence, Bachamo became a symbol of loss, which can strike even in moments of unexpected success. The path of its return to the sea was strewn not only with ice fields, but also with questions that remained unanswered. This paradoxical phenomenon of resurrection underscores how nature and human ambitions can unexpectedly intersect, creating stories that leave no one indifferent. Since Bachamo left its crew, its fate continued to unfold in the vast oceanic expanses, where its reappearance became a true enigma for many. The first reports of its reappearance began to surface a few years after the sailors abandoned it. In 1930, when researchers began to actively explore the Arctic waters, several fishing vessels encountered Bachamo. The ship, as before, appeared abandoned, but its hull remained strong enough to float. Over the following years, in 1940 and 1950, Bachamo resurfaced in the reports of local fishermen and researchers, but its condition worsened. There were reports that the ship had become a haven for marine animals. Seals and even polar bears were seen near it, as if seeking shelter on its deck. In 1960, when a group of scientists decided to conduct an expedition to these waters, they too encountered Bachamo. This time, they found that its hull was covered in algae and marine salt, adding an air of mystery and abandonment. The researchers left notes on board with their collected data, hoping that someone else would find them and continue the investigation of this extraordinary phenomenon. By the end of the 1960s, Bachamo had become a true symbol of the Arctic enigma. Its appearances were spoken of not only by sailors, but also by local residents, who told legends of how the ship seemed to drift on the endless waters, reappearing when least expected. Observations of Bachamo continued, and it began to be seen not just as a derelict ship, but as a kind of marine spirit that defied explanation. Some researchers even started to believe that the ship had acquired some supernatural power, as it had not only survived the harsh conditions, but continued to appear on the horizon as if nothing had happened. In 1969, when Bachamo was spotted again, its condition began to raise more questions. The ship looked more worn out, but still retained its shape. Many began to wonder what had really happened to this ship. Why did it continue to appear despite all the trials it had endured? And why did its life seem to continue in this silent ocean? The ship became not just a subject of scientific interest, but also a part of the cultural folklore that continued to grow with each new appearance. Speculations and theories surrounding Bachamo have not ceased to this day. Thus, Bachamo became not just a ship, but a true symbol of an unsolved mystery that continues to stir the minds of people. December 1931 marked a significant moment for Bachamo. A seal hunter, finding himself in those unpredictable waters, spotted the silhouette of a ship emerging from the fog. It was as if he had seen a ghost from the past beckoning him. He couldn't resist the urge to investigate the abandoned vessel. Climbing aboard, the hunter felt the winds from the icy ocean penetrate his soul, and the loneliness of the ship reminded him that these vast spaces held stories of abandonment. However, the weather soon worsened, forcing him to hastily leave Bachamo and return to the cold sea. This brief visit added another page to the mythology of the ship. Upon returning to shore, the hunter recounted his findings to the locals, and his words spread like sparks from a fire. Soon, rumors began to circulate that Bachamo was guarded by a spirit that did not allow ordinary mortals to stay on board for too long. Nevertheless, these tales did not deter other adventurers. For the next few years, Bachamo continued to appear in reports. But no one who attempted to explore it remained on board for long. Each new appearance of the ship fueled interest in it, sparking debates and discussions among local residents and scholars. Some argued that it was merely an old ship, abandoned and left to the mercy of fate, while others, more romantic souls, saw Bachamo as a symbol of the unknown, a ship that could endure everything and continued to traverse the endless waters. In 1933, a group of intrepid sailors set out on an expedition to unravel the mystery of Bachamo. They did not just want to see it up close, but also to understand why so many rumors and legends had grown around it. However, when they reached its location, the ship vanished again. This fact only added to the enigma surrounding Bachamo, with locals beginning to view it as a magical entity that could appear and disappear at will. At this time, Bachamo became a true object of veneration and discussion. People spoke about it not only among sailors, but also among ordinary folk who would ask it for luck before setting out to sea. Each time, thus, Bachamo became more than just an abandoned ship. It became a symbol of how nature and human imagination could intertwine to create unsolved mysteries. At that Years later, in the 1940s, reports about Bachamo continued to come from Eskimo hunters and trappers, whose eyes were accustomed to the harsh conditions of the Arctic. These accounts echoed from the past, where an old ship loomed on the horizon, evoking both interest and fear. Hunters venturing onto the icy expanses would stumble upon traces of Bachamo, and sometimes they would even board it. But each time they entered, they found the same surprise: emptiness and silence, into which the cold seeped, and the deck was covered in a layer of snow, as if Bachamo had hidden from the world under a white blanket. These countless witnesses claimed that there was not a single living soul on board, but strange sensations lingered. Some said they felt as if the ship was observing them, as if it had its own will. Rumors about this ship spread like wildfires in the night, and each news story became more peculiar. Some claimed to see shadows moving when no one was looking, while others spoke of a whispering wind coming from the hold, as if the ancient trees of the ship were trying to say something. From time to time, when the weather was particularly harsh, fishermen and hunters would stop to look at Bachamo from a distance, and each time they saw it, it stirred mixed feelings: fear and awe. Some believed the ship served as a beacon leading to uncharted territories, while others saw it as a warning not to venture too far into the icy waters. In 1946, a group of researchers decided to search for Bachamo based on the stories of local residents. They were equipped with modern equipment and hope, but as before, the old legend was lost in the fog. When the researchers reached the presumed location of the ship, they were disappointed. Bachamo had vanished once again. This became a familiar tale: a ship that appears and disappears at will, as if it exists outside of time and space. Soon, Bachamo became part of the cultural mythology, spoken of even at festivals and gatherings, when people would gather around a fire, listening to elders tell stories of seeing it on the horizon and how it influenced their lives. With each new story about Bachamo, its image became more enigmatic and its existence more uncertain. These tales seemed to bring the old ship to life, filling it with legends that would remain in the memory of those who dreamed of seeing it again. With each new mention of Bachamo, its images became more vivid, and the ship continued to remain in the shadows of the icy waters, like a mystery that would never leave these lands. In 1969, the last confirmed sighting of the Bachamo occurred, marking the culmination of all its mysterious stories. This moment will be remembered as the final chord in the symphony of enigmas surrounding the ship. It seems that Bachamo decided to play hide and seek once again. But this time, its presence was not only noticed by local residents, but also by the scientific community. Scientific instruments placed on the ice recorded signals that could only have come from a derelict ship. This discovery caused a stir among researchers, and when they approached closer, they felt a sense of déjà vu, as if they were witnessing the same scene described by hunters many years ago. Snow covered the deck, and silence reigned on board, broken only by the sounds of ice cracks. Some of the researchers claimed to have seen the outlines of the ship, as if it were trying to escape the ice's embrace. But this was just an illusion, a trick of the eye created by the harsh nature. When the group of researchers had to retreat due to worsening weather conditions, they left behind only conjectures and theories about Bachamo becoming a prisoner of its own myth. Since the ship disappeared from human sight, its image has become a part of local folklore, and the last sightings have only fueled interest in its fate. People began discussing what really happened to the ship. Perhaps it met its doom, or perhaps it continues to wander through the icy expanses, guarded by sea spirits. In the Beaufort Sea, where icy winds howl like ghosts, Bachamo has become a legend. Its name is spoken with reverence and awe. Each new generation seeks stories of those who saw it in the distance, how it disappeared again and again into the white silence. Legends of the ship trapped in the ice have become the basis of the local residents' cultural identity, linking them to a history full of mysteries and unanswered questions. They tell of how, in stormy winter nights, when the wind howled, the silhouette of Bachamo would appear on the horizon, beckoning them. Each new generation takes up this story, adding their own details and fantasies, but the essence remains unchanged. Bachamo has become a symbol of the unknown, the mysterious, and the eternal. Looking back at the years when researchers tried to unravel its mystery, one can see how quickly perceptions change, from surprise and expectation to acceptance that some things simply cannot be explained. Scientific attempts to explain its disappearance only evoke laughter from the locals, who know that Bachamo is more than just a ship. It is a part of their heritage. Its last trace in history remains in the Beaufort Sea, where it will wait for its time to emerge from the shadows of the ice, to whisper its secrets to those who can see it. Bachamo is not just a ship. It has become a true maritime legend, adorned with numerous myths and rumors. Local residents have dubbed it the ghost ship of the Arctic, a name that sets it apart from ordinary vessels that once sailed the waves. The ship, which, according to many, wanders through the icy expanses like a phantom, refusing to leave this world, has become a symbol of elusiveness and invincibility, inspiring both fear and awe in people. In the Arctic, where every crack of ice can herald a new mystery, Bachamo has become a subject of endless debates. People discuss its fate as if it was some modern odyssey, where the hero never leaves his path despite all obstacles. One hunter recounted how one moonlit night he saw a glow in the distance, which he believed came from Bachamo. It was as if the ship was not just a vessel, but something more, capable of drawing people's gaze and stirring their sense of adventure. Some claim that when the storm subsides, one can see its silhouette on the horizon, shrouded in mist, which suddenly disappears as one approaches. It's no wonder that among local residents, there is a belief that Bachamo is guarded by sea spirits who will not let it vanish without a trace. This belief has become part of the culture, creating an aura of mystery around it and elevating it to the status of not just a ship, but a genuine phenomenon. The legend of Bachamo attracts not only locals, but also researchers who are willing to embark on risky expeditions just to have a chance to see this ghostly ship. Some researchers even claim to have detected its appearances on radar, but the evidence always remains inconclusive. All these stories, wrapped in secrecy and mystery, only fuel the interest in Bachamo, creating around it an aura of legend that cannot be dispelled. Each time someone tells a story about Bachamo, it begins to live its own life, and with each new version, it becomes even more elusive. The ship, which has become a symbol of the sea itself, its unexplored expanses and unsolved mysteries. Thus, Bachamo continues to sail through people's minds, as if it truly exists in reality, even if it is just a figment of imagination. In this context, Bachamo goes far beyond the realm of an ordinary ship. It becomes a symbol of the inexplicable, something that is best left in mystery. In this, the attempts to save Bachamo became a true epic, filled with numerous names, expeditions, and tragedies. The first attempts began soon after the ship was declared lost. In the late 19th century, a group of brave souls, inspired by the legend of the ghost ship, set out to the Arctic with a single goal: to find Bachamo and bring it home. However, the harsh conditions they encountered were no less dangerous than the myth itself. Ice fields, storms, and severe frosts did their work. Many teams simply did not return. In the early 20th century, one of the most famous expeditions, organized by an American polar researcher, encountered a real ice hell. The ship they were on became trapped in the ice, and the crew was forced to spend a whole winter on the permafrost, waiting for the ice to retreat. All attempts to establish contact with the outside world failed, and the researchers were left to dream about Bachamo. Later, in the 1930s, a group of Norwegian sailors decided to undertake a risky operation. They developed a plan that involved using specially prepared ships capable of breaking through ice barriers. However, they were met with disappointment. A strong storm that broke out just as they were close to the presumed location of Bachamo dashed all their hopes. The ice barriers proved insurmountable, and the sailors were forced to return in a hurry, leaving their dreams in the ice desert. In the following decades, rumors about Bachamo led to numerous new expeditions, each of which gathered the best of the best, ready to challenge the elements. In the early 2000s, one of the research ships, equipped with modern equipment and radars, once again attempted to find the ship. However, even advanced technologies were powerless against the unpredictable polar conditions. Ice fields, like a living creature, changed their shapes, and storms repeatedly thwarted the plans. Each time an expedition returned empty-handed, the local residents would just smile. Bachamo is not meant to be found. These failures gave rise to a whole culture of myths and legends, which only added to the enigma of the ship. In the end, every attempt to save Bachamo ended in failure, and researchers who had spent years and resources returned with the feeling that they had encountered something that defied rational explanation. The harsh Arctic conditions, like a stern judge, left no chance for success. The place where Bachamo was said to appear remained an insurmountable barrier, as if the sea itself guarded its secrets from curious researchers. Every time one hears about Bachamo, a question inevitably arises. What is it really? It's not just another story about a lost ship, but a whole symbol reflecting the madness of human ambitions and the endless thirst for answers. Bachamo has become something more than just an abandoned vessel. It is a ghost lost in the icy expanses, embodying the eternal struggle of man against the untamed nature. How many lives have been spent in search of this ghost? How many dreams have shattered against the impenetrable ice? Each expedition, each team venturing into these cold regions was ready to risk everything for a glimmer of hope. This is not just the romance of the search, but reality filled with tragedies and disappointments. The Arctic, with its merciless conditions, leaves no room for success. Every time one looks at the Arctic map, one understands that Bachamo has become a cultural code for many researchers. It is not just a ship, it is a challenge. A challenge not only to nature, but to oneself. It has even in the 21st century, when we have technologies capable of exploring the depths of the oceans and the peaks of mountains, Bachamo remains unattainable. It is as if the ice itself, being a living creature, guards its secrets, unwilling to reveal them. In the end, Bachamo has become a myth that continues to live, inspiring new generations of adventurers and researchers. Each new rumor of its appearance on the horizon fuels interest and supports the legend. This ship has become part of cultural heritage, part of the eternal human struggle for knowledge of the unknown. Isn't it? Ironically, despite all the efforts, we still cannot understand what exactly happened to this ship, and perhaps this is the essence of the story itself. Today, for instance, the Captain Everett ship, which disappeared in this ominous triangle in 1925, is shrouded in horror and mystery. becoming the basis for numerous theories and speculations. How many times have we heard stories about this ship, which, like a ghost, forever left this world? Some claim many rumors surround this ship, from conspiracy theories to ghostly tales, each adding its drop to the ocean of myths. But let's not delve into the mysticism and simply look at the facts. How many lives were lost in these waters, where one can lose not only a ship, but also reality itself. This sea has become a treasure trove of mysteries, and Captain Everett is just one of many stories that fuel our desire to solve them. The triangle has become a laboratory for researchers trying to unravel the mysteries that sink into the depths of the ocean. And here, each loss here is not just a statistic, but human lives etched into history like pages of forgotten books. It's no one can, despite one thing is certain, these waters still hide secrets, and each new investigation can reveal not only facts, but also new legends. The disappearance of the coal ship SS Cotopaxi is another page in the mysterious book of the Bermuda Triangle, adding fuel to the fire of speculations and theories. At first, the ship vanished without a trace, leaving behind only emptiness and questions. All that remains of its journey are reports of its last known location and grim speculations about what might have happened. Not a single piece of debris, not a single clue. This disappearance became part of a larger picture where ships vanish as if swallowed by a black hole. Researchers seeking answers began to raise questions. Could Cotopaxi have been another victim of unpredictable weather, or did it meet a fate more characteristic of horror films? Whether true or not, SS Cotopaxi has become a symbol of the enigma of these waters, where each disappearance is not just an event, but a true drama left without an ending. How many SS For the ship around it grew hundreds of stories, rumors, and theories like seaweed around a sunken ship. Ships continued to disappear in these waters, and each new incident only fueled interest in the Cotopaxi. 80 years had passed since its disappearance, but no one had given up hope, and each new year brought new hopes, as if the ocean itself guarded this secret, hiding it under layers of salt and time. But the reality is that behind all these searches lies only one truth. The Cotopaxi became a victim of mystery, and its fate, it seems, will remain unsolved forever. Each new mention of the Cotopaxi evokes interest and nostalgia, like an old photograph with faces forgotten by time. Augustine researchers using modern technologies such as sonars and underwater drones were able to identify the wreckage, and this discovery confirmed long-standing rumors and theories. However, some experts suggested that Cotopaxi could have been carried by currents, which is quite plausible in these waters where marine activity is high. Others linked its fate to mystical phenomena, which, according to some, are characteristic of the Bermuda Triangle. This ship, which had long been considered a myth, once again found itself in the spotlight, and its history continues to live on as something more than just a story about a sunken ship. Cotopaxi became not just a name, but a symbol of the fact that even the oldest mysteries can be solved if enough effort is applied. However, he studied numerous ship's documents, archival records, and accounts of lost ships, particularly those that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. His research also involved comparing the materials used in the wreckage with those used to build the Cotopaxi. Barnett's scientific approach aimed not only to confirm the identification, but also to provide new insights into the fate of the ship and its crew. As a result, when the wreckage was definitively identified as the Cotopaxi in 2015, it became not just a scientific achievement, but a true triumph for the entire field of archaeology. The recognition of the wreckage as the Cotopaxi sparked a new wave of research into not only this ship, but also other vessels that had disappeared in these waters. Each new interest in the Cotopaxi grew, and many researchers began actively searching for other sunken ships using the methods employed in this case. Thus, despite modern technology and archival research helping to clarify the details of this catastrophic event, the nature of the ship's demise remains shrouded in a mystical aura. Why didn't the Cotopaxi manage to send a distress signal? Why did the ship? Its unexpected appearance adds a touch of surrealism to the story. Was the Cotopaxi's fate predetermined? Or was it just a coincidence that turned it into one of the most discussed maritime mysteries? Research conducted after the identification of the wreckage only adds fuel to the fire. Each new fact about the ship's fate makes us reflect on how much more remains unknown in the history of seafaring. Despite all efforts to explore and understand what happened to the Cotopaxi, the discovery of debris in 2015 only added new questions to the existing ones. This event served as a vivid example of how the sea can keep its secrets and how even the most unsolvable mysteries can be revealed over time, albeit with a certain mystical aura. We live in an era where technology allows us to peer into the depths of the ocean, but the Cotopaxi remains a symbol of nature's power that surpasses human capabilities. It is intriguing that this discovery enabled us to learn about the final hours of the ship, but many details of its disappearance remain unclear. The legend of the Cotopaxi continues to live, adding new elements each time, striking the chords of human curiosity and fear. It is important to note that the discovery of debris did not lift the veil of mystery, but, on the contrary, enriched it, opening new pages for research and discussion. Each new fact that surfaces only underscores how complex and multifaceted the history of seafaring is. In this context, the Cotopaxi becomes not just a ship, but a symbol of all the tragedies that have occurred at sea. We can only speculate about how many more such stories are hidden in the depths of the ocean, waiting to be revealed or forever remaining in the shadows. Thus, the Cotopaxi remains not only an object of interest for historians and researchers, but also a symbol of human vulnerability in the face of nature. Each time we ponder its fate, we encounter a great paradox. The more we learn, the more we realize that there are still countless untold stories waiting to be told. The circumstances surrounding the disappearance of the Cotopaxi and its return after nearly 90 years only intensify its eerie legend, making us wonder if we will ever be able to fully understand what happened on those fateful days. How many more secrets does the ocean hold, and which of them will one day be revealed, while others will remain forever hidden in its depths? Every maritime adventure, as a rule, is not only romantic and exploratory, but also tragic, leaving scars on the pages of history. Take, for example, the Mary Celeste, a ship that became a symbol of inexplicable disappearance. It was not just a ship, but a subject of endless debates and theories, from a simple mutiny of the crew to mystical speculations about ghosts that could inhabit the vessel. Even centuries later, the mystery of the Mary Celeste does not lose its allure, but rather fuels interest in maritime legends. On the other hand, we have the Cotopaxi, which became no less intriguing an element of maritime mythology. Its history is full of unanswered questions and shadows that seem to never leave it. The discovered wreckage only added fuel to the fire. We learned some details, but much remains beyond our understanding. How could such a large ship simply disappear, leaving behind only a trail of questions? This is not only a tragedy for those who were on board, but also a challenge for all of us trying to understand what happens in the vast waters of the ocean. Here lies the paradox. The more we know, the more questions we have. Each new discovery becomes only the beginning of further debates and hypotheses. Look at all these stories. They are like intertwined threads stretching through the centuries. Will we, humans, ever be able to understand all the secrets that the sea hides? In each of these tragedies, there is a unique story, but they are all united by a common theme: the inexplicability and tragedy that surround life on water. And to this day, the question remains open. How many more such stories are hidden in the depths, waiting to emerge and remind us of how fragile human life is in the embrace of nature? Each of these mysteries, from the Mary Celeste to the Cotopaxi, is not just a story, but a real test for our reason and imagination, leaving unanswered questions. How many more chilling legends await us? How many more secrets are hidden in the dark depths of the ocean? Unfortunately, we have no answers to these questions. The ocean is not just a water surface. It is an element that can both sustain life and swallow it without a second thought. Despite all our technological advancements, we remain mere guests in its vast expanses. Modern navigation systems, powerful ships, and even satellite communication cannot guarantee safety in this boundless aquatic world. How many times have stories of shipwrecks and vanished vessels left us in awe and bewilderment? We can recall the USS Cyclops, a military transport ship that disappeared without a trace with more than 100 people on board. Or consider Edward Smith, the captain of the Titanic, who, despite the advanced technologies of his time, collided with an iceberg, leaving the world in shock over the scale of the tragedy. The question is not how intelligent we are or how advanced our technologies are, but how unpredictable the ocean can be. It can be both a friend and an enemy, and unfortunately, we do not always know how to predict its mood. The ocean can distort reality. Imagine a ship setting sail full of hopes and expectations, only to vanish as if it had never existed. And there are many such stories, from lost whalers to fishing vessels that returned home but never arrived. Scientific progress cannot guarantee complete control over the sea, and it is this untamability that makes the ocean both fascinating and terrifying. Our desire to conquer its depths meets the reality where every wave can hide danger. We build ever more advanced ships, but we cannot predict what will happen next. The ocean remains full of mysteries and uncertainty, and its depths hold many secrets that may never be revealed. The ocean continues to whisper its stories, and despite all our efforts, it remains a mystery that may never be solved. What truly happened in these silent waters? Did the ocean simply swallow its victims without a trace? Or is there something more? Something that pursues us from the depths and from the surface? Recall the sea monster from numerous legends. Giant creatures capable of engulfing entire ships, leaving only splashes on the surface. Of course, these are just myths, but they beautifully illustrate human fear of the unknown. The legend of the Kraken also comes to mind. A giant octopus that, according to folklore, tears ships from their roots and drags them to the bottom. Or, for instance, the Loch Ness Monster, which has become a symbol of Scottish waters and attracts tourists seeking its ghostly presence. 800 years ago, the Britannic sank, and its mysteries remain unsolved. World War II also left its mark. Sunken vessels like the HMT Lancastria, which carried thousands of lives to the bottom, still lie on the ocean floor, becoming objects of research but also of unresolved questions. The ocean does not simply preserve them. It creates an aura of mystique and tragedy around them. Consider, for example, the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth, which is not easy to reach and where creatures dwell that seem to have come from another planet. Who knows what secrets it hides? Over this, local fishermen spoke of strange phenomena when their nets suddenly became entangled and boats began to drift, as if an invisible force was pulling them into the unknown. These are not just stories to scare children. They are part of a culture that has been shaped over centuries. Moreover, the ocean hides not only physical mysteries, but also cultural ones. Different peoples who have experienced maritime disasters have created their own myths and legends. For example, in Polynesia, there is a belief that ancestral spirits guard their waters and can punish those who do not respect them. This view of the ocean as a living entity that demands respect is deeply rooted in culture. How many mysteries does the ocean conceal? How many lives has it taken, and how many more will it claim? With each new investigation, we only lift a corner of the veil, but we cannot encompass everything. It is important to remember that the sea is not just a source of resources. It is a force that we must respect and understand. The ocean's mysteries will haunt us like shadows left by those who remain forever in its depths. Human curiosity is boundless and relentless. We are driven by an insatiable desire to peer beyond the horizons that remain hidden from us, to unravel the mysteries that might be better left undisturbed. This drive propels science, art, and even philosophy. We build submersibles, create complex technologies, and assemble research teams to decipher the riddles that nature so carefully conceals from our eyes. Each new discovery in the ocean is like a click in a lockbox, opening more questions than answers. Consider, for instance, the work of scientists studying phenomena such as bioluminescent organisms or deep-sea ecosystems, the existence of which even seasoned biologists found surprising. We know that the ocean harbors creatures that can survive conditions that would kill a human. Plants that emit light and fish with transparent bodies are just the tip of the iceberg. Yet, each time we lift the veil on these mysteries, we encounter new anomalies that challenge our understanding. Recall the zone of silence in the Gulf of Mexico, where strange phenomena continue to baffle us. Diving into these waters is like touching the boundary between science and myth. Alongside our thirst for knowledge, we also harbor fear. Fear of what might be discovered. Fear of what we cannot control. Legends of sea monsters, which I have already mentioned, are not mere fables. They reflect our internal struggle with the unknown. We fear what we cannot explain, and this makes us more vulnerable. The ocean becomes a symbol not only of endless resources, but also of boundless terror. When we speak of losses at sea, shipwrecks, and tragedies, we cannot ignore that behind each story lie real people, their dreams, and hopes swallowed by the abyss. These fears and hopes intertwine, weaving a complex fabric of our perception of the sea. Humanity will continue to explore the ocean, even knowing its dangers. We will build new ships and develop new technologies to better understand it. This drive will not fade because it is ingrained in our DNA to explore, to discover, and perhaps to conquer. Without this drive, we would never have taken a single step forward. Scientific discoveries and new research open doors to understanding not only the ocean, but also ourselves. We learn not only about the creatures dwelling in the depths, but also about the life on the surface. The ocean, with its vast expanses, remains an eternal enigma, and despite all our efforts to comprehend it, it will always be just a step ahead of us, like a ghost fading into the mist.